My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 68 years old, and the biggest mistake of my life was believing that love always comes back when you give it away. For most of my life, I thought I was lucky. I had a loving husband named Robert. We were married for 42 years. We weren't rich, but we had everything we needed. Robert worked as an electrician, and I worked part-time at a local library. Together, we built a simple but comfortable life in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. Our house wasn't fancy. The paint on the porch was peeling, and the kitchen cabinets were older than our son. But every corner of that house held memories. It was where Ethan took his first steps. It was where Robert and I celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and countless family dinners. To me, it wasn't just a house. It was home. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. Robert suffered a sudden heart attack. One moment, he was sitting in his favorite chair, watching a baseball game. The next, he was gone. Just like that, no warning, no goodbye. The silence that followed was unbearable. For months, I wandered through the house like a ghost. Every room reminded me of him. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet. His favorite jacket still hung by the front door. Sometimes I caught myself listening for his footsteps, but they never came. The loneliness was harder than I could ever explain. My only child, Ethan, lived about 2 hours away with his wife, Jessica, and their 2 children. He called often at first, checking on me and making sure I was okay. One weekend, he came to visit. We sat together in the backyard where Robert had planted roses years earlier. "Mom," Ethan said gently, "you shouldn't be living here alone." I stared at the flowers. "I've managed so far." "You don't have to manage alone," he replied. "Come live with us." I looked at him in surprise. "With you and Jessica?" "Of course," he said. "The kids would love having Grandma around." For the first time in months, I felt a small spark of happiness. The thought of hearing my grandchildren laugh every day sounded wonderful. A few days later, Jessica called me herself. "Margaret, we'd love to have you here," she said warmly. "You're family." Her kindness touched my heart. I truly believed she meant it. Over the next few months, Ethan and Jessica convinced me that moving in with them was the best decision. "There's no reason to stay in that big house alone," Jessica said. Eventually, I agreed. Selling the house was one of the hardest things I had ever done. The day I handed over the keys, I sat in my car and cried. It felt as if I was saying goodbye to Robert all over again. The house sold for a good price. After paying expenses, I had enough money to live comfortably. But Ethan and Jessica had a dream. They wanted to buy a larger home in a beautiful neighborhood, with better schools and a bigger yard. One evening, Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Mom, there's something I wanted to ask." I already knew what was coming. "If I can help, I will," I said. His face brightened. In the end, I contributed $180,000 from the sale of my home toward the purchase of their new house. I didn't think twice. After all, he was my son. Helping him felt natural. A few weeks later, we moved into the new house together. It was beautiful. The kitchen was modern and bright. The backyard was large enough for the children to play soccer. My room was on the first floor, with a window overlooking a small garden. Jessica hugged me when I arrived. "We're so happy you're here," she said. For a while, everything seemed perfect. I helped the children with homework. I cooked family dinners. I folded laundry and watered plants. I tried my best not to be a burden. Whenever I thanked Jessica for letting me stay, she smiled. "We're family," she would say. And I believed her. But slowly, little things began to change. Jessica's smiles became less frequent. Her voice became colder. Sometimes when I entered a room, conversations would suddenly stop. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I didn't want to create problems. I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. One evening, about 6 months after I moved in, I was walking down the hallway when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Jessica was speaking to Ethan. I wasn't trying to listen, but then I heard my name. I froze. Jessica sighed heavily. "Honestly, Ethan," she said, "how much longer is she going to stay here?" My heart stopped. I stood there in silence, staring at the floor, as the first crack appeared in the life I thought we had built together. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly that I could barely hear anything else. How much longer is she going to stay here? Jessica's words echoed in my mind. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood her. Maybe she was talking about someone else. Maybe there was an explanation. Then I heard Ethan's voice. "Jessica, she's my mother!" His response gave me a small sense of relief, but it disappeared almost immediately. "I know that," Jessica replied. "I'm just saying this wasn't supposed to be permanent." There was a long silence. I quietly returned to my room before they could see me. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation over and over. Every smile Jessica had given me suddenly felt different. Every kind word now seemed rehearsed. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and greeted everyone as usual. Jessica smiled. "Good morning, Margaret." It was the same smile she always wore. But now I could see something behind it. Something cold, something false. From that day forward, the atmosphere in the house slowly changed. At first, the changes were small. Jessica stopped inviting me to family outings. One Saturday morning, I saw everyone getting ready to leave. The children were excited. Ethan was carrying a cooler. Jessica was gathering snacks. "Where are you all going?" I asked. Jessica looked surprised. "Oh, we're just spending the day at Cedar Point." The amusement park was nearly 2 hours away. They had clearly planned it for days. Nobody had mentioned it to me. "Oh," I said quietly. "Maybe next time," Jessica replied, before walking out the door. The house felt painfully empty that day. I sat alone in the living room, listening to the clock tick. For the first time, I felt like a guest instead of family. As the weeks passed, things became worse. Jessica began criticizing almost everything I did. If I loaded the dishwasher, she rearranged it. If I folded towels, she unfolded them and did them again. If I cooked dinner, she found something wrong with the meal. The chicken is too dry. The vegetables are overcooked. The soup needs more seasoning. Nothing I did was ever good enough. At first, I apologized. Then I simply stayed quiet. One afternoon, I was helping my granddaughter Emma with her school project. We were laughing while making a model of the solar system. Jessica walked into the room and frowned. "Emma, don't you have piano practice?" Emma looked disappointed. "We're almost done." "I said piano practice." The little girl slowly stood up and left. The moment she was gone, Jessica turned toward me. "You don't need to interfere with everything." I stared at her. "I was only helping." "I know what you were doing." Her tone was sharp. The accusation hurt more than I wanted to admit. Helping my grandchildren had become one of the few things that brought me joy. Now even that seemed unwelcome. The children began spending less time with me. Not because they wanted to, because Jessica always found a reason to keep them busy. I noticed it. They noticed it. But nobody said anything. Not even Ethan. That hurt the most. My son saw the tension growing inside the house. Yet he never asked questions. Whenever Jessica complained, he simply nodded. Whenever I tried to explain myself, he changed the subject. It was easier for him to avoid conflict than face the truth. One rainy afternoon, I decided to bake chocolate chip cookies. The recipe had belonged to my mother. Ethan loved those cookies when he was a child. Whenever he had a bad day, I would make a fresh batch. The smell filled the kitchen. For a few minutes, I felt happy again. I placed the cookies on a cooling rack and went upstairs to grab a container. When I returned, the tray was gone. Confused, I looked around the kitchen. Then I noticed the garbage can. My heart sank. The cookies were inside, every single one, thrown away. Jessica was wiping the counter. "What happened?" I asked softly. She didn't even look embarrassed. "We don't need all that sugar in the house." I stared at the trash. "The children love these cookies." Jessica shrugged. "Nobody wants them." The words felt like a knife. Nobody wants them. I wasn't sure if she was talking about the cookies anymore. That night, I sat alone in my room and cried quietly into my pillow. I had never felt so unwanted, not even after Robert died. At least then I knew I had been loved. Now I wasn't so sure. A few weeks later, I accidentally overheard another conversation. This time, Jessica was speaking on the phone. I was passing the kitchen when her words stopped me cold. She laughed softly before saying, "Honestly, once she's gone, this whole house will finally belong to us." My blood ran cold. Gone? What exactly did she mean? Standing there in silence, I suddenly realized something terrifying. Jessica didn't just dislike me. She wanted me out of her life completely. And deep down, I feared that my son might be letting it happen. After hearing Jessica say, "Once she's gone, this whole house will finally belong to us," I couldn't stop thinking about it. The words followed me everywhere. While I washed dishes, while I folded laundry, even while I tried to sleep. At first, I told myself she couldn't possibly mean what I feared. Surely Ethan would never allow anything terrible to happen. He was my son, the little boy I had carried in my arms, the child I had comforted after nightmares, the teenager whose tears I wiped away after his first heartbreak. No matter how distant he had become, I still believed there was goodness in him. I wanted to believe it, but belief and reality are not always the same thing. A few weeks later, Ethan knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, can we talk?" His voice sounded nervous. I put down the book I was reading. "Of course!" He sat on the edge of a chair and avoided eye contact. That immediately worried me. Jessica and I have been discussing something. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What is it?" He cleared his throat. "We think it might be good for you to spend some time at a senior care facility." I stared at him. "A nursing home?" No, he said quickly. "Just temporarily. They have activities, medical staff, social programs. It might be good for you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I don't need a nursing home, Ethan." "It's not a nursing home." "It sounds exactly like a nursing home." He sighed heavily. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." The words hit me harder than I expected. Don't make this difficult. As if I were the problem. As if my existence had become an inconvenience. For several days, Ethan and Jessica continued bringing up the subject. Every conversation felt like pressure. Every argument ended the same way. "It's for your own good." Eventually, I became exhausted. I stopped fighting. One morning, Ethan told me they had scheduled a visit to a facility nearby. "Just come take a look," he said. "That's all." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The building was clean and modern. The staff seemed friendly. Residents sat in common areas watching television or playing games. Still, something felt wrong, very wrong. As we walked through the halls, Jessica smiled more than she had in months. That alone made me uneasy. A woman from the administration office greeted us warmly. She handed Ethan a folder. Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Wilson, your room is already prepared." I blinked. "My room?" The woman smiled. "Yes. We received all the paperwork." My heart skipped a beat. I turned toward Ethan. "What paperwork?" Neither Ethan nor Jessica answered immediately. The silence told me everything. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. "You said we were visiting," I whispered. Ethan finally looked at me. "Mom." "No." My voice cracked. "You said we were visiting." Jessica crossed her arms. "We've already discussed this." "No, you discussed it," I replied. "You never listened to me." The administrator looked uncomfortable. Several people nearby had begun watching. I turned back to Ethan. Tears filled my eyes. "Please tell me you're not leaving me here." For a moment, I saw guilt on his face. Real guilt. Then he looked at Jessica, and it disappeared. "We think this is best." Those 6 words shattered my heart. I had spent my entire life loving my son, sacrificing for him, protecting him, and now he was abandoning me. I don't remember much about the next hour, only fragments. The sound of paperwork being signed, the staff carrying my suitcase, the elevator doors closing, Ethan hugging me awkwardly, Jessica already walking toward the parking lot. Then they were gone. Just like that. Gone. For the first few days, I kept expecting my phone to ring. I thought Ethan would call and explain everything. I thought he would apologize. I thought he would come back, but he didn't. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into more than a month. No visits, no phone calls, no messages, nothing. Every evening, I sat beside my window, watching cars enter the parking lot. Each time headlights appeared, my heart lifted. And each time, disappointment followed. The loneliness was worse than anything I had experienced after Robert's death. At least death had not been a choice. This was. One rainy afternoon, about 6 weeks after my arrival, a staff member knocked on my door. "Mrs. Wilson?" I looked up from my chair. "Yes?" "Someone is here to see you." My heart immediately raced. "Ethan!" The woman shook her head. "No, a gentleman." Confused, I followed her to a private meeting room. A man in a dark suit stood when I entered. He looked to be in his 60s, professional, serious, unfamiliar. "Mrs. Wilson," he said kindly. "My name is Daniel Harper." I sat down slowly. "I'm sorry, but do I know you?" "No," he replied. "But I knew your husband." At the mention of Robert, my chest tightened. The lawyer opened a leather briefcase and carefully removed several documents. Then he said something that changed everything. "Before your husband passed away, he instructed me to contact you if certain circumstances ever occurred." I stared at him in confusion. "What circumstances?" Mr. Harper looked directly into my eyes. "If your family ever abandoned you." A chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly realized that Robert had seen something long before I ever did. I sat frozen in my chair. The rain tapped softly against the window as Daniel Harper's words echoed through my mind. "If your family ever abandoned you." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. "My husband said that?" I finally whispered. Mr. Harper nodded. "Robert loved you very much, Mrs. Wilson. He wanted to make sure you would always be protected." Tears filled my eyes. Even after all these years, Robert was still taking care of me. In a way, he always had. The lawyer opened the folder in front of him. "Several years before his death, your husband created a trust fund." I frowned. "A trust fund?" "Yes." He slid a document across the table. "The trust currently contains approximately $2 million. I stared at the number. Surely I had heard him wrong. $2 million? Robert and I had never lived extravagantly. We drove used cars. We rarely took vacations. We saved every dollar we could. Apparently, Robert had saved far more than I ever realized. "I don't understand," I said. "He invested carefully for decades," Mr. Harper explained. "Most importantly, he included specific instructions." My heart pounded. "What instructions?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "The trust belongs entirely to you." I felt overwhelmed. "But that's not all." He pointed to another page. "Your son only receives access to any portion of the inheritance if you choose to grant it." For the first time in months, I felt something other than sadness. Not happiness, not revenge, strength. The kind of strength that comes from realizing your future, is no longer controlled by people who hurt you. Over the following weeks, Mr. Harper helped me understand everything. I no longer needed to stay at the facility unless I wanted to. I could rent an apartment, buy a home, travel, build a completely new life. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt hopeful. Then something happened that surprised absolutely no one. Ethan called. After nearly 2 months of silence, his voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Hi, Mom!" I almost laughed. The sudden affection felt painfully obvious. A few days later, both Ethan and Jessica arrived at the facility. Jessica carried flowers. Ethan carried a box of chocolates. The performance was almost impressive. "Mom, we've missed you so much," Ethan said. "Missed me." The words felt empty. Jessica sat beside me and grabbed my hand. "We feel terrible about everything." I looked at her calmly. This was the same woman who had thrown away my cookies. The same woman who had pushed me out of my own family. Now she wanted sympathy. Interesting. For several minutes, they apologized. They blamed stress, busy schedules, misunderstandings, anything except themselves. Finally, I asked one simple question. Where was all this love when I was sitting alone every night waiting for a phone call? Neither of them answered. The silence was deafening. I looked at my son. His eyes dropped to the floor. For the first time, he seemed unable to escape the truth. "You left me here," I said quietly. "Mom, you left me here believing I was a burden." Tears appeared in his eyes. But something inside me had changed. The wound was still there. Yet it no longer controlled me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply finished being treated as if my worth depended on other people's approval. A month later, I moved into a beautiful apartment overlooking a small lake. Every morning, I drank coffee on the balcony and watched the sunrise. The peace felt wonderful, but I wanted to do more than simply enjoy my freedom. I wanted to help others. At the care facility, I had met dozens of elderly people whose stories sounded painfully familiar. Parents abandoned by children, grandparents forgotten by families, people who felt invisible. I couldn't stop thinking about them. So I made a decision. Using part of the trust, I created a foundation that supported abandoned seniors. We provided legal assistance, housing support, social activities, and emergency resources. Soon, the program began helping hundreds of people. For the first time in years, my life had purpose again. As for Ethan and Jessica, they continued reaching out. I never refused to speak with my son, but rebuilding trust takes far longer than breaking it. Some wounds heal slowly, others leave scars forever. One evening, nearly a year later, I visited Robert's grave. The sun was setting behind the trees. I placed fresh flowers beside the headstone and smiled softly. "You were right," I told him. The breeze moved gently through the grass. For a moment, it almost felt as if he were listening. My husband once told me that real family isn't measured by blood, money, or obligation. It's measured by kindness. At the time, I didn't fully understand. Now I did. The people who abandoned me lost something money could never buy. My trust. and I discovered something far more valuable than revenge. My own worth. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 68 years old. Losing my family broke my heart, but finding my strength again saved my life.